Good morning, everyone. Thanks for kicking off this day with us. And we are starting with some tough news this morning. Yet another mass shooting this week, this one on the campus of Florida State University.
Yeah, this tragedy happened just before noon Eastern time yesterday. Police say a gunman got out of an orange Hummer and started firing at people near the student union. At least 2 ended up killed, 6 others injured. The suspect has been identified by police as 20-year-old Phoenix Eichner. He's the son of a sheriff's deputy and is believed to be a student at FSU.
Officials said a gun that belonged to the suspect's mother was found at the scene. Police described how Eichner was apprehended.
They challenged him and ended up shooting. He did not comply with commands and was shot. We have no reason to believe at this point that he did not act alone. So there is no further threat to our community at this point.
That suspect was taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. There was also a vigil last night on campus near the shooting scene to honor the victims. We'll have full team coverage for you this morning, and starting that coverage with news correspondent Jay Gray joining us from Tallahassee with the latest on this. Jay, good morning.
Steve and Savannah, good morning to you. And we're just outside the student union here, one of the shooting scenes. There were multiple scenes on the FSU campus. We have learned this morning that the 6 people who were injured during the attack are all in fair condition. No life-threatening injuries there. And that number does include the suspected gunman, as you talk about, 20-year-old Phoenix Eichner, who police say he refused to surrender as they approached him, and that's when they opened fire.
Students, teachers scrambling for a place to hide as the explosion of gunshots echo across the Florida State campus.
Everyone started screaming and running at some point and like toppling each other over. It just was like this mass hysteria.
Campus police rushing to the sound of the gunfire.
FSU police responded immediately, engaged, neutralized, and apprehended the shooter.
At least 2 victims dead, several others wounded. The alleged gunman, the son of a sheriff's deputy, among those hospitalized.
Unfortunately, her son had access to one of her weapons, and that was one of the weapons that was found at the scene.
The gun identified as an old service weapon, one of 3 located at the scene. Friday's classes are canceled. The FSU community stunned and still on edge.
Our hearts go out to our students and the victims of this terrible tragedy.
So many here mourning and, like investigators, trying to understand how and why it happened.
Yeah, and while there are no classes today, students will be allowed to return and gather any of the belongings that they may have left behind during all of the chaos, all of the scramble as the shooting took place. The Student Life Center will be open today with counselors for students, faculty, staff, family, anyone who feels like they need someone to talk to following the events of yesterday. Savannah, Stephen.
All right, Jim Kavanaugh, thank you very much. Excuse me, that's who we have coming up.
Yes,
Jay Gray, thank you very much.
Jim Kavanaugh is who we want to talk to, the expertise here from this former law enforcement analyst for NBC. Jim, talked to you several times in situations just like this, unfortunately. We learned yesterday that the suspect is the son of a sheriff's deputy and had close ties to the department himself. Let's hear a bit from the Leon County Sheriff to describe that situation.
Her son had access to one of her weapons, and that was one of the weapons that was found at the scene. The alleged shooter was also a long-standing member of the Leon County Sheriff's Office Citizen Advisory or Youth Advisory Council. So it's not a surprise to us that he had access to weapons.
Phoenix Eichner was described by a witness as being a, quote, normal college dude. What are your takeaways from these details? And do you think that connection to law enforcement could affect the investigation somehow?
I don't think it will affect the investigation. You know, I do personally know that sheriff, and I was a Florida sheriff's deputy in another county. No, I don't think so. I think he'll conduct that investigation with integrity. And, you know, the law enforcement community down there hurts when this happens because they don't want to be part of anything like that. But this young man, we've got to find out what happened with him. I think the motives are going to fall under the giant rubrics of power, revenge, or hate, somewhere in there. is what's in his mind. He's either, lashing out because he has a perceived wrong, somebody done him wrong, a grudge against somebody there, or he's operating in a revenge motive or hate. It could be any one of those. I think it'll fall in there somewhere. But he somewhere got in his mind that this is an act he should do for some reason. Oftentimes, if it's, say, hate crime, they're trying to connect with a diaspora community of like-minded haters, which they get from the internet or, from interacting with them personally. So, we're like, why would someone do this? It's unbelievable that someone would do this. But, they're interacting with a smaller group of haters who think it's a good idea. It's like school shooters who identify with the Columbine killers. If they go onto some of the dark reaches of the internet, they'll find support for that. There's people that cheer on mass killers, and they want to be a part of that little group, that little group of people who admire mass killers. So there's some group they're trying to be together with if they're in kind of a hate group or connected to some kind of terrorist activity. But it could be just an individual motive. It could be just revenge. He's troubled. He wants to get back into school. He's angry at the school or for whatever reason. He's 20 years old. He doesn't have the judgment to, seek help. And so he creates this awful tragedy for the university in Tallahassee.
Jim, talk about the piece of this that we mentioned a moment ago, the fact that this, his mother, sheriff's deputy, and he had access to her weapon. How big of an issue that is, how big of a tragedy that is, and how that will play into the investigation.
I have carried a gun every day in my life since I was 21. And, the way I feel is no one should have access to anybody else's weapons. You should have your weapons locked up. All of your weapons should be locked. And you have access to them only. It doesn't matter. They don't trust you. Oh, I can trust my son. I can trust my cousin. I know he's a good kid. I know that's a good guy. You don't know about anybody's mind. You lock your guns up. And that way you won't have to deal with somebody using your firearm in a tragedy. And all guns should be secured. We could drop crime tremendously in America if we would just secure the guns we have, because so many of them are stolen guns that become used in crime as well. And school shootings in particularly, students often get the guns from home. Their parents' gun from a night table, a grandfather's gun from a cabinet. And what do we hear? Oh, I went shooting with him before. I took him hunting. He was responsible. It doesn't matter. You don't know what's in his mind. You don't know the pressures he's under. You don't know the social sites he's on, the web. You don't know who's influencing his mind. And so you don't want to do that. You don't want to trust anybody. Lock your guns, keep them secure. Law enforcement, officer, family or not, lock up your guns.
All right. Law enforcement analyst Jim Kavanaugh, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Yeah, we appreciate it, Jim. Always your expertise. Well, now let's get to the latest in the legal battle over the fate of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Now, despite mounting court challenges, the Trump administration is still defending its deportation of the Maryland father to El Salvador. Now, that's a move the government admits was an administrative error. Late Thursday, Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen met with Abrego Garcia in what appeared to be a hotel in the country's capital. That same day, a federal appeals court rejected the administration's attempt to block a judge's order directing the government to facilitate his return to the U.S.
Yeah, in its opinion, one of the court's longtime conservative judges blasted the administration, writing that the government is, quote, asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process, adding this should be shocking. In the Oval Office yesterday, President Trump dodged the question about whether he would take steps to bring Abrego Garcia back to the U.S. to face a judge.
Well, I'm not involved in it. I'm going to respond by saying you'll have to speak to the lawyers, the DOJ. I've heard many things about him, and we'll have to find out what the truth is. I was elected to get rid of those criminals, to get them out of our country.
For more on this, let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, great to see you. So we mentioned just a moment ago, Maryland Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen, he was able to meet with Garcia. He posted a photo of them sitting together. This is after telling reporters that he was initially turned away from that confinement center by armed soldiers. Van Hollen says he doesn't claim to know all the facts here, but that Garcia does require due process. Has the Trump administration shown any evidence to justify his deportation, especially since I mentioned a moment ago, it's sort of been conceded that there was an administrative error here?
Right, guys. The government itself in its filings acknowledged that it was a mistake to deport Abrego Garcia to the El Salvador prison. This, for the administration, has been an insistence here that it was in the right to not effectively try beyond providing a plane for Abrego Garcia to return, that this was the purview of El Salvador's president, Bukele. He is now in the sovereign country and is under their purview. And when you asked about the question of what evidence has been presented, nothing so far to the courts in terms of any new evidence or understanding that Abrego Garcia was affiliated with MS-13, dating back into 2019, brought before an immigration judge. The government had presented that he, along with wearing Chicago Bulls paraphernalia, an anonymous informant suggested that he was part of MS-13, a particular affiliation in New York, though he never lived in New York. And so this is where a lot of those questions are still hanging over all of this here. And the government at this point in time is now getting pushback, very direct pushback from the government, because it is yet to make a case, let alone before an immigration court or another judge, that he was rightfully deported.
So much hinging on that facilitate term there, Vaughn. Yeah. There's even more to ask you about, though, in regards to headlines involving the president. He expressed his frustration over interest rates and accused Fed Chair Jerome Powell of playing politics. Let's listen.
Interest rates should be down now. They should be coming down. In Europe, as you know, they reduced them, I guess, 7 times. It looks like they're going to reduce them again and again and again. But our guy wants to play cute. I'm not happy with him. I let him know it, and if I want him out, he'll be out of there real fast, believe me.
So, Vaughn, do we think the president is serious about trying to remove Powell, who was his pick to begin with?
Yeah, Stephen, I'm glad you pointed that out, because he was his pick in 2018, and then President Biden in 2022 gave him another 4-year term. So he's technically in this position until May of 2026. The Fed is an independent government agency, and the courts have ruled in the past that they are independent. The president doesn't have purview over their firing and their termination. Yet, what you heard there from the Oval Office was an insistent president suggesting that Jerome Powell has made mistakes, in his opinion. Of course, this comes just 24 hours after Jerome Powell noted that the tariff policies coming from this White House are causing great uncertainty in the American and global economy. But this could potentially be an issue if you were to try to fire him that could go to the Supreme Court, which ruled back in 1935 in a situation that the president didn't have the unilateral ability to fire an independent agency head. At the same time, the president and this White House have terminated other individuals on other independent agency boards. And so this is really going to be an issue if the president were to try to terminate Powell that hits at the heart of the extent of the executive power that a president holds.
Vaughn, I want to switch gears real quick just before we let you go, because we are following some updates on the discussions to end the war in Ukraine. Earlier this morning, Secretary of State Marco Rubio pretty much gave an ultimatum here to European leaders who he's been meeting with in Paris. What is he demanding?
Right. This is coming at a time where we should take into context President Trump had promised to end Russia's war against Ukraine in 24 hours. We're now 88 days into this administration, and there are missiles that continue to be fired between the two sides here. And I want to let you listen a little bit more of the secretary here stipulating what those demands and what the position of this administration is.
But we're not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end. So we need to determine very quickly now, and I'm talking about in a matter of days, whether or not this is doable over the next few weeks. If it is, we're in. If it's not, then we have other priorities to focus on as well.
This largely has been directed at Russian officials. Steve Witkoff, a special envoy for President Trump, met last week with Vladimir Putin, but yet Russia has not agreed to the terms or laid out clearly for this administration what its expectations and what it's willing to concede in its fight against Ukraine. But this calls into the serious question that if the U.S., as Secretary Rubio suggests, were to walk away from the negotiating table between the two sides, would the U.S. continue to provide military aid and financial aid to Ukraine in its defenses against further Russian aggression? That's not clear. Guys.
All right, Von Hilliard, thank you. Appreciate you always.
Well, President Trump's fight over ending automatic birthright citizenship is headed to the country's highest court, the Supreme Court, announcing it'll hear oral arguments next month on Trump's efforts to enforce his executive order that would end automatic U.S. citizenship for children of undocumented immigrants or foreign residents.
Almost immediately after President Trump signed the order in January, multiple federal judges swiftly blocked it nationwide. But the Trump administration says those judges didn't have the legal authority to do that. Now the justices will decide if lower court judges have the power to issue broad injunctions that block the president's policies.
NBC News analyst Danny Ceballos joins us now with more on this. Danny, good morning to you. So the Trump administration had asked the justices to lift these injunctions and let this work its way from the ones that it received from the lower courts, but they instead decided to hear arguments. How should we look at that decision alone?
Yes, I mean, no matter what, this is a case, birthright citizenship, that will end up finally at the Supreme Court. But it's going to take time. And as you can see, we're not litigating the actual issue of birthright citizenship. We're really litigating a different issue, which is, can these district courts, these lower courts, do they even have the power to issue these nationwide injunctions and prevent the administration from carrying out this executive order? But eventually, sooner or later, we will get to the purely constitutional issue of whether or not birthright citizenship, or jus soli, is the law of the land. Something that almost everybody in the United States thought, well, of course, that's what we're taught in civics class. But according to some, even some academics, that may not be exactly the case.
So on this issue, like setting birthright citizenship, as you mentioned, aside for a moment, just of if the courts were able to do this, what do you think the likelihood is that the Supreme Court rules in the Trump administration's favor? Because this is obviously an important issue for courts and judges.
Yes, and in a way, it feels as though they have to address to some degree the issue of birthright citizenship, because it goes to the issue of whether or not the executive branch has the power to issue executive orders that that cannot be touched, in their view, by injunctions from the district courts. So really the issue to be decided is whether or not district courts have this power to issue nationwide injunctions. And by the way, nationwide injunctions themselves have always been controversial, because our federal district courts are these little geographic areas. Sometimes they're the size of a state, sometimes they're smaller than a state. There's a real question as to whether or not, or to what degree, one sitting judge, say, down the street in the Southern District of New York, can issue an injunction that affects people in Oregon or Hawaii or Alaska. So that's an issue that's always been controversial, and I expect we'll see it addressed here.
So keeping all of that in mind, if the court does side with the Trump administration on this, how will that play out? What will happen next?
Well, the next step will be procedurally, we'll move towards deciding the issue of whether or not birthright citizenship exists for everyone. And this is really the issue. The Trump administration is not seeking to do away with birthright citizenship for everyone, just a category of people that the Trump administration says who were born here but not subject to U.S. jurisdiction, whatever that means. And in fact, the entire debate comes down to just those few words. What did the framers mean when they passed the 14th Amendment? What did they mean when they said people born here and subject to jurisdiction thereof? There's a lot of debate about it, and especially because it's something, like I said before, that nobody ever really questioned until about 8-9 years ago.
A lot of implications there for how that plays out. Danny Ceballos, thanks so much.
Thank you. Well, Luigi Mangione, the man accused of shooting and killing the United Healthcare CEO in Manhattan, is now facing new federal charges. A federal grand jury returned a 4-count indictment against him that includes 2 counts of stalking, a capital murder charge, and a gun charge in the death of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi has directed prosecutors to seek the death penalty for Mangione. His attorneys are calling the new charges a, quote, political stunt. Mangione is currently in a Brooklyn jail on related state charges and has pleaded not guilty.
This morning, the Menendez brothers' bid for freedom is on hold yet again for their long-awaited resentencing hearing that was supposed to happen yesterday. but it was cut short by a judge in the middle of some heated arguments between the defense and the prosecution. NBC's Liz Kreutz has those details.
What was supposed to be the start of Eric and Lyle Menendez's critical resentencing hearing, yet again postponed.
Today was a little bit disappointing for us as a family as we march on.
The day getting off to a chaotic start. Contentious moments between the brothers' lawyer and the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office prompting the judge to abruptly pause the hearing. The two sides feuding over whether the judge should factor in a comprehensive risk assessment the California Parole Board is conducting of the brothers as part of a separate clemency bid that Governor Newsom is reviewing to determine their risk to the public.
We wanted to make sure that the judge got a copy of that report. It represents additional facts. And the prosecution doesn't fear facts.
But the brothers' attorney saying the DA has tainted the proceeding.
What was ultimately decided is we are filing a motion to recuse the district attorney in this case.
The judge now saying he will want to review the risk assessment before deciding on resentencing. Eric and Lyle Menendez are serving life without parole for the 1989 murders of their parents, crimes they say were an act of self-defense after years of abuse by their father.
Will the brothers be testifying?
Outside the hearing, a spectacle of its own.
748.
Intrigued members of the public lining up to get a seat inside.
I think they have done enough time for what they did.
They committed premeditated murder, and if they should get out, well, Charles Manson should have been released.
And our thanks to Liz Kreutz for that report. The judge will hear arguments over the defense's motion to recuse the DA and whether to consider that risk assessment at a hearing coming up next month. A new date for the brothers' resentencing hearing has not yet been set.
Let's get you over to weather now as we head into Easter weekend. We have a severe weather threat. It continues for millions this morning, and it includes the risk of possible tornadoes.
Yeah, serious stuff. NBC meteorologist Angie Lastman tracking it for us. Good morning, Angie.
Hi, guys. Good morning to you. Unfortunately, you are right. This travel disruption that we'll likely see as we get into Easter weekend is going to be because of a couple of storm systems that we're tracking, specifically across the middle of the country. But notice how active it is across the Great Lakes this morning, northern Michigan, parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, all dealing with that, along with the potential for more snow falling across parts of the Rockies and additional snow already falling this morning. On top of that, we're going to see some of these flood alerts go into effect for 8 million people here across, again, parts of the plains and stretching into the Midwest, St. Louis included in that, as we ramp up for a couple of days of kind of severe weather and the potential for some heavy rain. So let's lay it out for you. Here's today and tonight. Spring storms start to, of course, develop across the Rockies, and that's where we'll see some of that additional snow happening. Travel will likely be difficult on the roadways and in and out of Denver Airport here over the next couple of days. And then we see that severe threat kind of take shape as late parts of the day develop and continues into the overnight periods. And even tomorrow morning, we'll be talking about some of this across this same region. And it's pretty expansive. It does include 12 million people. We've got Chicago stretching to Abilene, Oklahoma City, Springfield, St. Louis, all included in that, as well as Indianapolis. Hail is going to be the main threat, and large hail at that. We'll see the potential for some strong wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour as well, and a couple of tornadoes. But the hail is what we're specifically watching for Oklahoma City and Wichita Falls to be the biggest threat. That does include Tulsa as well. This is just the start of it. We're going to see this kind of same setup as we get into tomorrow as well. We'll see the frontal boundaries kind of stall out in Texas, and that means that, again, severe weather is going to be a possibility and repeated rounds of heavy rain. This is kind of Saturday is when our flood threat will start. And you can see, as far as the severe weather is concerned, Springfield to Dallas, including San Angelo, some of those same locations have the potential for, again, another round for tomorrow. Hail will be the greatest threat, but all of those hazards are on the table, damaging winds and a couple of tornadoes, too. By Sunday, a new storm system emerges out of the southern plains, and this kind of brings us a line of thunderstorms into the later part of your Sunday, just in time for those Easter dinner time plans. And this is going to be essentially Louisiana to Illinois that we see the bullseye. So Springfield, Little Rock, Shreveport, all locations that you have to watch for these thunderstorms developing and potentially becoming severe by the second half of your Sunday. Hail, wind gusts, tornadoes, again, all of those hazards will be possible. The flood threat, it's going to be, again, same kind of locations with these repeated rounds of heavy rain. So Wichita Falls up to Rolla. We've got West Plains, Joplin included in there, with upwards of 6 inches of rain possible, guys. So flash flooding will be something that we're specifically concerned about on Saturday. Wah, wah, wah. I know.
On a holiday weekend.
It's okay. The bookends of the country are going to be quite nice for Easter Sunday. I didn't get to that, but, you know, there's my fun
Just the
fact.
bad
There you
news.
go. The positive at the end.
Yeah.
We like it. Angie, thank you.
Andrew's in a little bit.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.